Hey, and welcome to Revel CA, brought to you by Prospectus Labs. I'm your host, Brando. We talk about people and talent concepts with other recruiting leaders from startups. Our mission is to empower the candidate-employer relationship in the future of work. You're tuned in with Jeremy Lyons. Jeremy is a co-founder of RecOps Collective, your source for all things RecOps. He's an editor and writer of the RecOps RoundUp, your weekly source of RecOps updates and thought leadership, and creator of RecOps GPT. He's a second generation recruiter in his family and has been in the RecOps space for 6+ years, where he started as a recruiting coordinator. Jeremy, great to have you, man.
Great to be here, Brando.
So let's jump in. Where are you based and what are you working on?
Yeah, so I'm based in Los Angeles, and what am I working on? Well, I think one of the biggest things that I'm working on, as per the intro, is RecOps. I've been really working on trying to bring RecOps to the sun. It's been usually hidden behind in the kitchen, and now, at least with the rise of the tech that is coming out, a lot of talk about AI and those pieces. Is now starting to kind of have its place. And I think that it's really, really fun, but I think it's still being defined. And I'm working on helping people define that, helping groups build and yeah, seeing what I can do to help the community.
Awesome, man. Wore my LA hat just for you today. No better place in the world to spend $20 on a green juice.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, that's when you start making your own green juice, that's when you've really gone full LA image.
Oh yeah. I worked in the natural foods industry for some years, but I was a traveling road warrior. Shout out to other road warriors. And I was doing my own kombucha at the house, and I had like my little hotel jar. And I went on one trip for like a week and then had to go to another town for like another week. And I got home and there were like so many scobies. And that was like the turning point where I was like, you know what? This homemade kombucha isn't for me.
The only thing I could think of, and I know that it's coming up, was prohibitions. And now I'm thinking of bathtub kombucha instead of bathtub gin. I'm sure there's some branding thing that somebody could do with that.
Epic. So you mentioned, working in the RecOps space. Maybe that's a good place for us to start. Excuse me. So it kind of gets a misnomer and a lot of things get lumped into RecOps. So for anyone tuning in that might be new to this concept, what is RecOps? How do you define it?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I know we see it all the time. Me and my contemporaries, we're always talking about it. There's always that element where we're sitting going, well, was that RecOps? Was that not RecOps? Or is that more recruiting? So kind of to define it, first things first, RecOps is a multidisciplinary field. People called recruitment operations, TA ops, talent acquisition operations, recruiting operations, recruiting ops, you name it. I think we have a lot of names, and that probably lends into it. But I tend to think of recruiting operations as covering 5 pillars in recruiting. It is an operations pillar, and underneath that operations pillar, you have the coordination, you have the systems and tools, you have change management. You could probably put enablement in there. Then you've got a programs and initiatives pillar. That's usually things like your referral program, your UR program. Could again also be enablement. I have to give a shout out to Poetry HR and Adam Gordon for kind of driving recruiter enablement. Data and analytics, because oftentimes when you're close to the systems, you're close to the process, you got to know how to report on it. Depending on the company, depending on the size, employer branding, because again, most of those things are all interwoven, and then strategy. So kind of just quick recap there. You've got ops, you've got data analytics, programs, initiatives, employer branding, and strategy. So that's kind of how I think about it. And when I'm reading articles or I'm reading content, reading things that people are saying, my brain is sort of trying to figure out, okay, which pillar are we putting this one in? And if it's placed across a number of pillars, what percentage of each pillar is it adopting to sort of talk about?
Yeah, that's great. Even just the way you talk about structure in building out recruiting systems, a lot of times organizations aren't used to that level and caliber of kind of a consultative approach. Um,
Yeah, well, and I think the thing to kind of jump in there too and talk about is that recruiting operations, unlike some other roles and jobs in companies, is also a mindset. So it isn't just something that you do. Maybe it's not just like sales, which has a very clear cut. I do sales. Um, there is a tremendous amount of philosophy involved. There's a tremendous amount of psychology involved, and you can have a RecOps mindset and not be in RecOps, which is kind of a fun thing. And I think that that's sort of uniform across a lot of other ops roles, marketing ops, rev ops. There's all this psychology that goes into it because you're ultimately designing systems and getting systems and data and out of those systems that has people behind it. And we all know that people are the most combustible element on the planet. So you're constantly dealing with change in very unique ways, and you have to be creative and think through how you're designing something, because it might work today, but it's not going to work tomorrow.
I love the way you present it as a philosophy. We've seen ops be tacked on to an abbreviation of other business domains. I think obviously the most top of mind one would be RevOps.
Yep.
But since you're talking philosophy, I immediately flip a switch on DevOps as a philosophy. Yeah. And there have been times where you and I have actually gone back and forth on like, oh, I don't see that as RecOps, or I say things like, oh, I see it as just like kind of all classification recruiting. And you're able to kind of shape my thinking, or I'm able to like ask provoking questions about how do we define this philosophy. And for me, that's where it's more at a product level, and like people as a product and hiring as a product versus revenue operations, which is like, okay, here's your CRM, here's your enablement, and here's your training course to get SDRs and AEs up to quota.
Yeah, well, and you touch on something really important there too, which is, and I tell people about this in recruiting all the time, is that recruiting operations could be seen as recruiting's product management group or project management group. It could be also seen as a lot of different things. And I think one of the really cool aspects, especially now as it is developing, is that recruiting can sometimes be an entry point into people learning more about different avenues of the business that you don't hear about in school. My mother was an executive recruiter. She was in town last week, and we were having this conversation where I turned, I looked at her, and I said, I love whenever people are talking about crisis management. It just sounds like a fun place to go, but there's no major in college for crisis management. And you don't end up in crisis management without somebody sort of saying, hey, have you heard of this thing called crisis management? And I think that that's sort of how a lot of these operation roles are popping up, is the tools have changed, the functionality has changed, the specialization required to do it and do it well has changed. And because of that, people who are really, really good at doing the thing, so being a recruiter, being a sourcer, being a salesperson, being an engineer, they don't have the time to focus on the minutia. But there are other people who love that minutia and who want to see those people exceed and want them to be more efficient and want to exist in that space. And that's how we end up in these operations roles and why these operations roles exist. And it's fun.
I couldn't agree more. Recruiting is fun. At the end of the day, we're placing people in jobs, and we have to bring that element of fun. There's a psychologist, her name is Dr. Emily Onholt, and she talks about like the traits of leadership. And one of the traits that she talks about is like playfulness. And it's really cool to see her present that to corporate executives, because like, when was the last time you had fun at work? my MO is like, if I'm not having fun, like, why am I doing this? So I try to be that hype man in recruiting when I work with hiring managers and make sure they're having some fun along the way. Because if they are, they're going to show up to those meetings. They're going to show up to the ATS and complete scorecards. They're going to have that philosophical switch on how they're hiring.
Well, I think one of the things that you're touching on there too, and it was something I meant to mention kind of previously, but now is even better, is that I think when you give people a why, it helps people have fun because you know the direction and why you are doing something. You're giving somebody purpose. And I think that in and out of itself is really important, because if you don't have a why, and I wrote an article called RecOps Starts With Why, and I know Simon Sinek has a book called Starts With Why, or Why. And I think that allows people to have fun because you know where the sandbox is. And I think there are some people who love to play outside of the sandbox and go running around, but I think sometimes having a sandbox in place at least gives you enough guardrails to go, here are the rules. Now we know where the rules are. Let's go and figure out, how do we expand the sandbox, or how do we start sharing toys in the sandbox to make a really cool sand castle? And then I think the other aspect about recruiting too that people overlook is recruiting sometimes changes lives. I think especially when we think about underrepresented minorities and DEI pieces, it's important to recognize that it's not just sort of run of the mill. Like, recruiting, we live here, this is our house. But candidates, hiring managers, interviewers, they don't live here in this house. They're visiting, they're guests, and we have to provide them with an experience that's memorable. And hopefully, they leave having learned something that will help them, or change the way they think about something, or it changes their lives because you're now giving somebody a job with a tremendous income potential that they didn't previously had, all because you knew what you were looking for.
Snaps, my dude. Yeah. I think when I think about that, having fun, defining a why, bringing change management into an organization, whether it's a startup, private equity company, a public company. Sometimes we take for granted the domain knowledge that accumulates by working in HR. You mentioned being a second generation HR practitioner. I spent my career early foundation with phenomenal HR leaders that pass down just that base foundation, but not everybody who works in recruiting may have that level of attention, care, humility, empathy, respect for the process itself. And yeah, recruiting does change lives. It's big Spider-Man vibes. With great power comes great responsibility. And I guess that makes you Peter Parker.
Maybe not. I mean, I think that all hiring should have that great power with great responsibility. People should not be viewed as this finite resource all the time that can just sort of be like, well, they don't know how to screw in the I'm looking at something on my desk and I have one of these Allen wrenches. It's like, you don't know how to screw in the one thing with an Allen wrench, but nobody's bothered to sit there and say, well, it looks like this, sounds like this, you can do this. It's just, now you don't have a Phillips head, you've got an Allen wrench. It's the same thing. I think people are very quick to sort of say, we don't have the skills in house. We don't do the internal mobility. We don't do the internal development. We don't have it. We got to go out and we got to find it, instead of coming out to the people in your company and saying, this is what we're looking for. This is what we need. Anybody been doing this? And letting people go, oh, hey, actually, in my free time, I've been doing this. You gotta voice things that are sometimes just said in silence, because you never know who's too scared to either raise their hand or just simply doesn't know. Yeah.
There's one thing you said earlier I want to double click on, and you brought up like crisis management.
Yeah.
I've been doing some executive search, and I've talked to some pretty senior folks in like the PR space, and I love recruiting communications professionals because their brag book is like crisis communications. It's like, oh, I put out this fire at XYZ. They've got like the best stories. And when you think about like these skill sets too, and talking to more skills in the marketplace, I think it is how we position that brag book. And candidates who have gone through reductions in force, they've had more short-term transitions outside of their control. People are doing things new in this future of work that are not historical CV, resume, bullet points. And folks are developing skills in between the chronological order of full-time W-2 roles that filter through an applicant tracking system and measure when people get an interview or not. So could you maybe talk about how you see RecOps fitting into the future of work, the strains that are being seen on systems, and what you're seeing?
Yeah. So love that. Love all three of those questions. And kind of going back to crisis management for a quick second here. I think that especially for recruiting operations people, especially those of us who started out as recruiting coordinators, um, you're used to situations, and it's not the same level. Let me be real here. It's not life or death, but you're used to situations that get your heart going, that are, hey, this interviewer isn't, it just canceled 5 minutes before. Let's scramble everything to try and do it. And those situations are moments where it's like, don't think, just do. And all of your training comes to the forefront about how quickly can you problem solve something on your that you need to do. So I think that that's something that comes through in a lot of places and doesn't show up on your resume and on your transcript. So I think one of the things that has changed, at least that I've seen in the last year and a half, and I attribute a lot of this to social media, probably Instagram, was that people started talking about side hustles a lot. And people basically said, look, you can't have just one income stream. It can't be your job. You have to keep learning. You have to keep developing. You have to have this growth mindset if you're going to be rich or famous or both. And I think that has been something that has been very interesting to watch over the last year, because in the last year, I got told, that was sort of when I ended my last full-time role, not entirely by choice, but just by market shift. And I think a lot of people, and this is at a time where, this time last year, I think ChatGPT launches. Half the world probably still thought AI was this sort of fun thing in movies that you either you got an iRobot or a Minority type report kind of deal. That was very futuristic, and now nearly everybody probably uses ChatGPT for something, even if it's just, hey, I need to write this letter, make sure that you remove all charged language so I'm not going to tick off my spouse. But that is not necessarily something that we grew up with in school. And people have had to self-learn that. And people are starting to realize that you need to keep adding skills if you're going to not necessarily make yourself irreplaceable, but have something. And then it becomes, all right, now where do I put this on my resume? And that, I think, is hard for people because there aren't a whole lot of templates out there. I mean, how do you call yourself a prompt engineer when prompt engineering is so brand new and fresh, and then feel confident that you're not lying about it? And I think that that's sort of something that, I haven't really seen this in the literature, but I think when people talk about imposter syndrome, I think imposter syndrome comes from, now you've got the role, you're in the role, and you have to reconcile every possible story you told during your interview process. And the company has to reconcile what they told you the job was going to be. So now you've got this awkward moment where everybody's sitting there going, well, were you authentic in giving me both honest and transparent answers? And written stuff. So I say that there's a difference between honesty, transparency, and authenticity. But it's also sort of pointing at the other person and saying to them, well, I may have said this, but on your job description, you said this, and I have not yet seen that. So who's telling who which story? All of that to kind of say, I hope that gets to the heart of the question. But if there were any parts of your question that I missed, re-ask them and I will address them directly.
That's awesome, man. I love the low-key callback to Spider-Man through the pointing at each other meme. So how can people find out more about your content, the RecOps Collective? Tell us more.
Yeah, so my content. So RecOpsCollective.com. We have an entire section. I say that our resource section is like the Players Tribune, because it is content written by RecOps people for RecOps people. It's not senior leaders saying, "Oh, well, this is how I would build. This is how I would optimize." These are the people who are boots on the ground building that vision. We have a great series that is called Discovering RecOps. It is people talking about how they got into the RecOps space. I am a huge proponent of people stopping saying, I fell into recruiting. I think that makes it sound like recruiting is super easy to fall into. You never hear people say, well, I fell into software engineering. So this is sort of, I like to say you discovered it, because it is you discover. So we have a whole series on that. I put out a weekly newsletter called the RecOps RoundUp, where I post RecOps jobs, thought leadership about RecOps. I share updates from ATSs or tools in the space so that people know what's going on, because you might miss that. Whenever people in this space are looking for roles, specifically RecOps roles, I will feature them. And so that's that content piece. Follow me on LinkedIn, and I follow me on Substack. I have the RecOpsCollective.substack.com, and yeah, or sorry, RecOps.substack.com.
Awesome.
But yeah, feel free to reach out whenever. I am somebody who will respond to my LinkedIn messages. And, one of the big things too that I've started is that I've had a lot of RecOps people obviously have lost their jobs. I'll get on the phone with people and we'll talk. Because I think that is also just really, really important at this time, that people know that there's a community there. And then also plug for the different RecOps communities, Slack communities with Ashby has a great one. OneReq has a great one as well. And then I know Good Time also has their own Slack.
Awesome. Well, Jeremy, always great to chat with you. This will be the first of many conversations. Thanks everybody for joining us. Tune in for more conversations with top people and talent leaders, where we empower the candidate-employer relationship in the future of work. So long for now.